We're going to talk about 3 more agencies today that helped create jobs in this time of high unemployment. The first of the 3 we're going to talk about was the Civilian Conservation Reforestation Act. The Civilian Conservation Reforestation Act. What do you think that had to do with? Civilian Conservation Reforestation Act. What's that? Okay, and natural resources such as forests. And what it did, it was a law that said we're going to start conserving natural resources. Well, if you make a law like that, you have to ensure it gets done. How do you ensure it gets done? Hire people to monitor it. And that's what they did. So this law would conserve our natural resources, and it put many Americans to work to ensure that we were conserving our natural resources in many, many, many different ways. I don't know if it's when it was formed necessarily, but it certainly put an emphasis on that. Now the second agency, this was a big one, and you may have heard of this, was called the Civilian Conservation Corps, better known as the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. This is a big one. You see examples of this all over the country that you don't even know about. Okay? Now what this law did is it hired unemployed single men between the ages of 18 and 25. The Civilian Conservation Corps hired unemployed single men between the ages of 18 and 25. Remember we talked yesterday about how many unemployed youth there were? Okay, well this particular law hired those youth, single men between the ages of 18 and 25. And their job was to do things like plant trees, dig reservoirs, build bridges, and like Mason said, and develop parks across the United States, both national parks and parks in general. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, called for the hiring of unemployed single men between the ages of 18 and 25 to plant trees, dig reservoirs, build bridges, develop parks, those types of things across the country. Now, at one time, more than 500,000 young men were enrolled in the CCC program. More than 500,000 young men went to work. All of them were unmarried, as we mentioned, and very poverty-stricken at the time they got these jobs. So this was a really, really important law that was passed. Now, I'll give you some detail on planting trees, digging reservoirs, building bridges, developing parks. Here's some examples of the actual work they did. They built fire trails in the forest. What are those? What are fire trails in the forest? Yeah, built fire trails in the forest. Very good. Cleared swamps, ugly swamps, and turned them into things like what? Refuges for birds, those types of things. Cleared swamps, yeah. Well, natural habitat. You get an ugly swamp area and turn it into a refuge for wild birds. It was polluted and everything else.
Oh, so like a polluted.
Yeah.
I was going to say birds.
Yeah. They planted trees all over the country. Planted trees all over the country. They were also involved in building dams, mainly small dams for flood control. They built dams for flood control. Anybody ever heard of Fort Peck Dam in Montana? Great big dam up in the northeastern part. That was completely built by the CCC. Completely built by them. They also cleared lands and made public parks out of them. And they were also involved in the conservation of what? America's natural resources. So they had all kinds of different work they did in fixing up this country, and it employed a ton of people. The third agency that was created by law that helped the unemployment was called the National Youth Administration, better known as the NYA, National Youth Administration. Who'd they target to help here? Youth, or you are termed in this class as a learning, so you are a student. Okay, so the National Youth Administration, or NYA, was created in 1935, and basically what it did is it distributed federal money to needy students who were paid regular wages for performing tasks in and around their schools. Okay, and that could be colleges or high schools, for example. So basically, this hired people to perform tasks in and around their schools. In the first year, in 1935, that National Youth Administration gave jobs to more than 400,000 students. So, I mean, you can see that these programs that FDR is putting in place, is it putting people to work? It's giving people jobs. Now, we're not saying the pay is, you know, going to make you a millionaire, but it certainly is pay that's going to keep you to be able to have your head above water. Now, what group of people might you be concerned about that maybe aren't getting a fair shake in the New Deal? Old people? Women? How about Negroes, which is an okay term to use at this point, Negroes. So we're going to talk about Negroes and the New Deal. Negroes. Now, did black Americans receive jobs and relief from Roosevelt's program? They did. They were not really discriminated against by Roosevelt's program. However, do you think that they got hit harder? Did black wage earners and black farmers get hit harder than white wage earners and farmers during the Depression? You think they took it harder? They did. And why did they take it harder? Because they were discriminated against in both the workforce and housing during the Great Depression. So they were in more need of help than white people because they were so far behind because of the Depression, because of the discrimination. And, you know, we talk about civil rights and we think of Rosa Parks in the 1950s when civil rights started, which is true. But where the Negro first was stimulated to fight for their renewed rights was during this time. This is when Negroes actually stood up and said, wait a minute, I'm going to fight a little bit for legal and constitutional rights. I'm being discriminated against. It didn't start in 1950 with Rosa Parks. It was during the New Deal programs that Negroes stood up and said, you know what, this is a bunch of BS. I'm tired of being discriminated against. I'm tired of getting no jobs or worse jobs because I'm black. I'm tired of not being able to live places because I'm black. And so Negroes began to protest a little bit. And in many northern cities, black leaders organized what they called "Don't Buy Where You Can't Work" campaigns. What does that mean? Don't buy where you can't work campaigns.
They don't let you work there, stuff like that.
Yeah, don't patronize or don't buy things from somebody that's not going to hire a black person to work there. So you start seeing your first protests on civil rights really during the New Deal when black leaders organized what they called "Don't Buy Where You Can't Work" campaigns. Well, in 1935, an organization called the National Negro Congress was established, which was used to promote the interests of black Americans within the New Deal administration. So they even went as far during this time, during Roosevelt's administration, to create the National Negro Congress, and it was a group of people that promoted the interests of black Americans during the New Deal. Promoted the interests of black Americans during the New Deal. So that was kind of your first organization of putting blacks together to fight for their legal and constitutional rights. We'll end with this. There were two things that led to the appointment of prominent Negroes to federal positions in Roosevelt's administration. In other words, he gave Negroes positions in his administration. Not in the big-time cabinet, but somewhere in his administration. And two things led him to say, you know, I'm going to appoint some prominent Negroes to federal positions in my administration. What two things do you think led to his decision to do that? What's that? Well, that's pretty close. Pressure for the Negroes' search for equality. People like the National Negro Congress were pushing it. So he was getting pressured by the Negroes in this country as they search for equality. Boys, this will be a lesson to you. What else convinced Roosevelt that he better get on the stick and promote some, what? His wife, Eleanor. That's exactly right. She pushed him like crazy to get on the stick and help these Negroes out and put some prominent Negroes in your administration. She was the one. So guys, don't think that that doesn't happen. And as a result of that, this last thing we'll say is the president established a group of informal advisors. What are informal advisors? If Hannah was my informal advisor on how to run this class, what would that mean?
Suggest.
She advises me, but we don't tell anybody that she's getting that position because she might get some heat maybe from the rest of you for saying what's going on. Or she may not, unfortunately in this time age, it's not cool to be, you know, good. So we informally, and then maybe she's a Negro, and so I really don't want people to know in 1935 that I've got a Negro doing that, helping me, because, you know, country will go crazy. What was the name of those advisors that he used? He gave a name. What do you call them?
Black Cabinet.
The Black Cabinet. That was a group of Negro advisors that he informally listened to, so to speak, but he took a lot of advice to try to get through this era. Okay? So the Black Cabinet. And we'll tell you who the most famous member of the Black Cabinet was tomorrow. It was, yeah.